Russia just walked into a trap it built itself, and what happened next on the front lines of eastern Ukraine didn't just humiliate Putin's spring offensive, it may have permanently broken it. For months, Moscow had staked everything on cracking Ukraine's most fortified, defensive corridor. A 50-kilometer steel spine running through Sloviansk, Kostiantynivka, and Druzhkivka, buried in concrete bunkers, minefields, and hidden shelters that Ukrainian forces had spent years reinforcing. Russian commanders were confident. They had numbers, momentum, and the memory of past advances to fuel their certainty. Motorized brigades from the 3rd Combined Arms Army, the 85th and 123rd separate motorized brigades, somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 soldiers, surged forward on the Sloviansk axis. On the second axis toward Kostiantynivka and Druzhkivka, Chechen Sever-Akhmat units and the 136th Motorized Brigade crept forward under cover of darkness, cloaked in heat-masking ponchos, navigating with GPS phones and paper maps because that's all they had left. They were betting everything on a war of attrition, attack in waves, absorb losses, attack again. But Ukraine had already designed the killing ground, and if you want to understand how quickly an army can collapse when the trap finally closes, stay with me, because what happened on the morning of April 30th is unlike anything this war has produced. If this kind of daily frontline analysis matters to you, drop a comment below. Your engagement helps us keep publishing this every single day. At dawn on April 30th, Ukrainian forces launched a sudden counterpunch northeast of Lyman, south of the village of Kostiantynivka. Russian infiltration units had no idea what was coming. The terrain they thought gave them cover, low-lying plains, scattered tree lines, became a coffin. Ukrainian drones and precision artillery worked in coordinated waves, tearing apart stalled Russian attack formations before they could consolidate. Simultaneously, a second blow landed in the Kostiantynivka-Druzhkivka corridor. Ukrainian forces surged forward in eastern Kostiantynivka, recapturing positions that Russian sources had only hours earlier claimed as their own. The soldiers Putin had sent to break the fortress belt found themselves surrounded, disoriented, and outgunned. Panic set in fast. Men who had advanced in formation began retreating in fragments. Then the fragments broke entirely. Some ran without looking back. What they left behind told the whole story. Abandoned weapons, wounded soldiers, equipment scattered across ground they never managed to hold. Ukraine didn't stop at repelling the attack. It pushed forward, converting a defensive victory into a territorial gain, extending south of Kostiantynivka and establishing new defensive positions in the eastern Kostiantynivka sector. The fortress belt had not cracked. It had become a launched spring, and Russia's Grand Spring Offensive had just recorded its first catastrophic failure. But here is where the story gets far more disturbing for Moscow, because this wasn't a one-day disaster. It was the visible symptom of a system that is quietly coming apart at every level. Our analysts update these numbers daily, and what the data shows right now should concern anyone watching this war. In April, the Russian army captured 12% less territory than in March, despite launching 2.2% more offensive operations. That means Russia is attacking more and gaining less with every week that passes. According to deep state tracking data, the Donetsk region accounts for 36% of all Russian advances, and that advance totaled just 53 square kilometers, nearly half of what Moscow managed in March. The mathematics of this war have turned grotesque. Russian forces are now averaging 36 separate assault operations for every single square kilometer of ground gained. To put that in human terms, the city of Kostiantynivka covers 66 square kilometers. At current rates, capturing it would require Russia to concentrate every available unit on a single point for more than 2 weeks straight, and Ukraine's defense makes that impossible. Beyond Donetsk, the picture doesn't improve. Only a fraction of total advances occurred in the Sumy region, 22% in Kharkiv, 12% in Zaporizhzhia. Russia is hemorrhaging resources across every front and breaking through on none of them. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, the total Russian-occupied area collapsed from 187 square kilometers to 98 square kilometers over just 3 months. Ukraine recaptured 89 square kilometers. President Zelensky confirmed that Ukrainian forces have recaptured 460 square kilometers of territory since the start of 2026. In March alone, Ukraine recovered more ground than it had lost since the summer of 2023. The balance is shifting, and it is not shifting in Putin's direction. Underneath that shift sits a collapse that no recruitment bonus can fix. The casualty numbers coming out of Russia's ethnic republics have crossed a threshold that carries historical weight. Verified losses from Bashkortostan and Tatarstan alone have now exceeded the total Soviet casualties from 10 years of war in Afghanistan and surpassed that figure by 20%. These are only the documented losses. Independent analysts estimate that public records and field monitoring capture between 45 and 65% of actual deaths. Major General Pivnenko of the Ukrainian National Guard stated it plainly. They advance very slowly and absorb enormous losses. 1,000 casualties per day is now routine. NATO's cumulative estimate puts Russia's total losses since the war began at 1.3 million. Of those, 400,000 occurred in 2025 alone, and the weight of those deaths falls almost entirely on men from Russia's poorest corners. Men from Tuva, Buryatia, and Altai are dying at 20 to 30 times the rate of men from Moscow. Contracts are signed in villages where the military bonus is the only economic option that exists. In some regions, one-time signing bonuses have reached 3 to 5 million rubles because the Kremlin cannot afford full mobilization. The social trauma of 2022, when hundreds of thousands of Russian men fled the country overnight, is still too raw. So instead, Moscow raises bonuses until the budget bleeds, pulls inmates from prisons, and deploys men with a few weeks of training directly to active front lines. 57% of contract soldiers now come from prisons or low-income areas. Training periods have been cut so severely that some units arrive at the front never having practiced combined arms coordination. The tactic of sending soldiers forward one by one in Kostiantynivka is not a choice. It is evidence that qualified personnel simply no longer exist in sufficient numbers. Meanwhile, the equipment being sent to support them is Soviet-era inventory, T-62 tanks, BMP-1 armored vehicles that lasts minutes against modern anti-tank drone strikes. Sanctions have strangled new production. A workforce shortage of 4.8 million has paralyzed factories. And Russian forces, out of options, have begun assaulting Ukrainian positions on motorcycles, ATVs, and in one documented case, golf carts. These attacks are being destroyed wholesale by Ukrainian FPV drones, but Russia has no alternative. And then there is the crisis that may define the rest of this war, one that carries a layer of irony so sharp it almost defies belief. Russia's frontline military communications had been running in significant part on Starlink terminals, Elon Musk's satellite network, built by the founder of a company headquartered in the country Russia is trying to defeat. On April 30th, the Russian government formally banned the import of all foreign satellite communication systems, including Starlink. The stated reason was national security. The real consequence was self-sabotage. In February 2026, when SpaceX broadly disabled Russia's gray market Starlink terminals, the front lines seized. Drone video feeds cut out, small units lost contact with each other, navigation reverted to paper maps, a 75% drop in communication traffic followed, and that outage directly contributed to Ukraine's recapture of hundreds of square kilometers in Zaporizhzhia. The import ban has now made that outage permanent. As existing terminals fail, they cannot be legally replaced. FSB inspections are strangling the gray market. Russia's domestic alternative, the Rosvyaz satellite constellation, launched its first 16 satellites in March 2026. They pass over Ukraine a handful of times per day. Total daily connection time does not exceed a few hours. Starlink operates over 9,000 satellites. Russia would need thousands more and years of launches to approach parity, and the war is happening now. Some Russian units are attempting workarounds, using terminals registered through Ukrainian-linked accounts and foreign intermediaries. Intelligence services are closing those loopholes. Russian military bloggers are already openly acknowledging what this means: slowed attacks along the Pokrovsk-Sloviansk line, degraded drone coordination, reduced artillery accuracy. One battalion sergeant operating near Kostiantynivka described his unit navigating with GPS-enabled phones and handwritten instructions. That image, a soldier in an active combat zone holding a paper map, is the clearest possible summary of where Russia's military actually stands in 2026. The picture that emerges from all of this is not a war that Russia is slowly winning. It is a war Russia is slowly losing the structural capacity to fight. It is attacking more and gaining less. It is launching 36 assaults per square kilometer. It is losing 1,000 men every day. Its communications infrastructure is disintegrating. Its equipment is running out. Its replacements arrive undertrained and unmotivated. Ukraine, meanwhile, has laid 4,000 kilometers of fiber optic cable behind its front lines in the Izium region, communication that no electronic warfare system can touch. Ukraine's Starlink access remains reliable. Russia's is collapsing. One side is directing fire using real-time drone imagery. The other is using paper maps. The fortress belt did not break. It held, and then it struck back. And what that means for the next phase of this war is something every person watching this conflict needs to understand. Putin promised a spring offensive that would break Ukraine's will. What his army found instead was a trap, 1,000 deaths per day, and a communications blackout caused by its own government's decision. That is not a war being won. That is a war being lost in slow motion, and the numbers prove it with brutal clarity every single day. If you found this analysis valuable, share it with someone who needs to understand what's actually happening on this front. And if you want the most current, ground-level breakdown of this war updated daily, not weekly, not when it's convenient, subscribe. We'll be back tomorrow with the numbers that matter.